Welcome to Resounding, a podcast exploring the power of the arts in advocacy and in action. We talk with artists and activists, taking a deep dive into questions surrounding the causes of displacement, the strength and the vulnerability of people on the move, and the potential of the arts to shine a light on social injustice and impact people's lives for the better. My name is Chris Nicholson, and this month I sat down with one of the original members of the Art27 network, Darren Abrahams, co-director and co-founder of the Human Hive. The Human Hive is an international organisation shifting the paradigm of development work. In this episode, Darren draws on his expertise as a musician and a body trauma therapist to discuss how practitioners can create safe spaces and work with and not for participants. It's my great pleasure today to welcome Darren Abrahams, who is the co-founder, co-director of Human Hive. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Human Hive has been with Art27 since its very inception, since the very early days, even before it was officially a platform in itself. It'd be great to begin with if you could just introduce for us Human Hive and also why Human Hive became part of Art27.
Thanks, Chris. Human Hive is a social enterprise based in the UK, and we were set up originally as a grassroots project, really to support people going through displacement. So that was myself and my business partner. So Human Hive is really me and my business partner, Kate McAllister, who is an educator, kind of innovative secondary school educator and incredible human being. And she had a fantastic idea to take an education program to the big Calais refugee camp in 2015, 2016, and to convert a double-decker bus into a school and take that as a focus for educational activity in the camp. And I met Kate very, very early on in her idea, and we formed this idea together. We headed off to Calais. And at the same time, Laura Hassler and I were in contact because we'd worked together several years earlier in Bosnia. And MWB was starting to shift its attention towards what people are calling the European refugee crisis, what we know as a war crisis, and was putting together a conference to bring people together who were working with displaced communities around Europe. And she invited me to attend because we were talking about the things that we were starting to do in Calais. And that was really the very beginning of our engagement with what became Art27, and the wider conversation around arts and culture, activism on the ground, grassroots activism from people living in the European continent for people who were arriving onto the European continent, fleeing from war, persecution, climate change, all the different things that we know about. So that was kind of my very beginning. And I suppose really, why did we want to get involved? Well, we weren't even proper organization at that time. As I said, we were a grassroots project. We became the Human Hive a little bit later, but there was huge common ground for, I think, with Laura and with the other people who were attracted to talk about this subject. There was common ground in a desire to support people going through this very specific experience, and a variety of approaches that seemed complementary: arts and culture approaches, educational approaches, activity-based approaches, and all really thinking about how do we create the most safe, the most welcoming, the most empowering welcome for people who were who will potentially be staying long term within our societies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've spoken over the years, Darren, about that sense of safety and welcoming on many occasions. We've worked together with Musicians Without Borders. We've spoken in different ways over the years. As part of my research, in fact, we talked. And that idea of safe welcoming and creating welcoming spaces is something that I always, I think is such a powerful part of your work and the way that you work. Can you talk a bit about how you conceive of that? Because when we've spoken about it, it's been in very small environments sometimes. How do you create safety and welcoming within a workshop? How do you create safety and welcoming when you're first walking into a room with people? when you're maybe first thinking of setting up a project, when maybe you're just making first contact. But also in very big terms, and Art27 uses that same language in terms of Europe and creating safety and welcoming for people arriving, people that have been internationally displaced, across continents displaced, arriving in Europe, and safety and welcome remain important words. Can you talk a bit about how you conceive of that on those different levels and from the context of Human Hive, but also just yourself?
Sure. Well, maybe I should say a little bit about myself and my expertise first, because I think that will set the framework for why I feel the way I feel. So I am a musician and singer, which is my intersection with Musicians Without Borders. I do work with Musicians Without Borders team too. I'm very fortunate to be part of this incredible organization, as well as running my own. But as well as a musician, I'm also a body-focused trauma therapist. So my training has been about supporting people to release the effects of overwhelming experiences from their nervous system. So that's very much a physiological, psychological approach to safety. So when we talk about safe spaces, I'm not talking about something that's necessarily cognitive, and it's not always something about physical environment. So because I began this work in a very unsafe environment, in a place in the Calais refugee camp, which was at that time an unofficial camp with a lot of threat around it from the French police force, from people coming and going, for internal issues. I mean, very, very specific, and I would say still a crisis environment. Our task was, how could we create spaces within that environment that felt safe enough for people to come together, engage with each other, and take part in activities. So we called those shared learning activities. So they had an educational foundation to them, but they were things like cooking and craft and making things and music. And layered over the top of that was language learning, so French and English language learning, because people needed kind of basic skills to survive in that area. So our task was, well, how do we create safety within an environment that is inherently unsafe? And that's very much to do with the presence of the practitioners within that space. And as a practitioner, if you are showing up to hold a space in which learning or cultural activity or befriending can take place, it's important that you can show up as in a safer way for other people as possible. So that means several different things. Thinking about yourself first, what's the level of your own overwhelm and your own comfort or discomfort within that environment? Can you prepare yourself so that you feel as embodied as possible as you enter into that space? And when I mean embodied, is like, are you in touch with your own bodies, your own feeling? Can you feel your feet on the floor? Can you breathe freely? Are you available for other people without having to be too consumed with worrying about your own safety and how you're going to feel in that space? So that's the first thing. Then to create environments that are good for other people, you need to ensure that they are inclusive. So when we talk about welcoming, the welcoming element of it is to be as open and non-judgmental and smiley, I think, is a really good way of saying, as smiley as possible, to help people to approach you. So I call it an invitation. If I'm entering into a new space and I want to ensure that space feels safe for others, can I, with the way that I show up and the way that I speak to other people, can I invite people into my space rather than impose myself onto their space? So recognize that the space I'm walking into is not my space. It may belong to other people. So I'm stepping into a space that is held by others, and I'm inviting people to join me in an activity or join me in a conversation. And it should always be an invitation. It should never be an imposition. It should never be a directive. So there's an element of that as well. How to create safety is to say, hey, I'm here in your space. I'm bringing something with me. Would you like to explore this thing with me? And if you don't want to explore that thing with me, that's totally okay. Would you like to do something else? How are we going to spend this time together? So that's the next level. And then The third level is when you're actually doing something together, is to just be very aware of the needs of the people in the room. So it's not about your agenda. You may have come in with a pre-planned lesson or pre-planned activity as something that you want to do, but when you actually encounter the people that you're there to support and to be with, it may not be the right thing for them. They may not be in the right emotional, psychological, physical space to be able to engage with you. There may be other things that are more important to them. So staying responsive to the needs of others is really important. And allowing people to come and go as they wish, allowing people to engage at the level that they're able to engage with, and also sometimes recognizing that today's not a good day and leaving. So that responsiveness, it's putting your whole self at the service of the moment, rather than expecting that moment and those people to shift themselves to be in the right space for you. If that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. And that space to allow that, I think, is something that practitioners and organizations find difficult to allow because of the pressures they feel to perform, because of donor pressures, because of internal pressures.
Yes.
But you're very strong that that's necessary. That to be able to walk away or to be able to turn up and say, well, actually, you're asking for something very different from what I had in mind.
Yeah.
And in that sense, to either change what you're going to offer, or I guess maybe reach outside and your role is to invite and facilitate other people to offer what's needed. Is that right?
Absolutely right. Yes. So we, at the very heart of the Human Hive as an organization, our main philosophy, we call with, not for. So we observed in the humanitarian aid field, and very much also within the education field, that things were often done for others or given to others, and very rarely were those others invited into the conversation about what it is that was going to actually happen together. So in humanitarian aid, it's like there's a decision made somewhere else about, here, take this bit of aid, have this thing that I've prepared for you somewhere else, without really consulting and finding out what's needed on the ground. So we wanted to ensure that if we were going to be offering something, then it was because it was what's needed. And if it wasn't what was needed, could we adapt so that we could provide what was needed instead? Remembering that the people we were working with, who may be in a different life situation to us, but have their own skills, have their own knowledge, have their own ideas, could we work together as much as possible to design solutions for situations that people were in? So I guess we realized quite early on in our work is that our work was very much about relationships, is bringing people together with different skill sets, who could create new relationships and then co-create solutions or shared learning experiences or whatever was needed in that space together. And the idea, which I think is very much shared by Musicians Without Borders, is that we wish to empower people to be able to take control of their own lives and move forward on their own without necessarily having help and aid from other people. People want to have their own sense of agency. When people go through really difficult life experiences, there are moments when we do need help and support and aid from other people. But if it becomes all about the help and aid and support, and we're never able to empower people to pick up the reins themselves and pick on with their lives, then we're not really helping. I feel that very strongly. We should, as NGOs, as caring organizations, we should be building in our own obsolescence. There should be a point when we have empowered people enough or provided everything that people need from us enough so that we can step back and allow people to take control for themselves. And then maybe we support in a different way, or there's a different kind of relationship. But what we want to be moving towards is a relationship of equality, where it's not about us giving to them. It's about us together, working together to solve greater problems.
And of course, that outcome is something that lots of organizations and people share. But what I hear different in your approach is the starting point. that to work towards that end goal, you don't need to walk in with the answer. You need to walk in prepared to set up the conditions in which change and interaction and relationship are possible. Because I think most of the time that end goal's there, and the idea is you walk in with the answer of how to get to that end goal, and that's our role. And we're going to achieve that by this. And I'm pretty set on that without having met the people, without necessarily knowing the situation. But you're talking or advocating for a much more open starting point. What you're in charge of, as you describe it, is the conditions of yourself and that you set up, or which you believe are the conditions which are needed.
Absolutely. Thank you. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's exactly what we do. And we shifted our approach quite quickly to training, supporting, and resourcing those what we might call change makers, or the people who were there in the facilitation role, rather than actually focusing on the work with what some other organizations call the beneficiaries or the service users. If we could train, support, and resource the people who wanted to do the intervention, then we could ensure that approach was going to be more widely spread. And also, again, we don't have all the answers. We, as Human Hive, are saying we don't have the answers at all. We don't know your context. We don't know your people. We don't know the thing that you're doing. So when we do training, we always say it's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. So we're here to give you some ideas about how you could tweak and shift the way that you're doing your thing so that they are more, our 3 principles, safe, they are more inclusive, belonging, and they are more meaningful purpose for the people who are taking part.
Yeah. I remember running music groups when I was in Rwanda. I was working as a music therapist at the time. And similarly, I worked in many different ways with different people. I didn't have one particular theoretical approach that I applied. I was a very young music therapist. It hadn't crossed my mind that I would need one. I kind of come equipped with many that I'd been trained in, and which I think was actually the right way to approach that. I would work towards objectives and, of course, have in mind what I felt people's needs were, or maybe I'd been told what someone else felt people's needs were. But of course, if you work with 6 people, you work with 2 people, they will experience something very different. Yeah. The idea that you can work with a group and 6 people or 2 people or 50 people experience music or experience anything in the same way or take away the same thing is simply wrong. It must be simply wrong.
Yes.
Because if we both listen to the same piece of music, we will respond differently. If we eat the same piece of food, we will respond differently. If we meet the same person, we will respond differently. So no matter what my intention was with music or with the group or with whatever process I started, people would report back to me different things. They would tell me something different that they'd experienced. If we sat drumming together, again, I wasn't young actually, but I was newly qualified music therapist. And if we were running a drum circle, I'd sit there quite just content that something was happening. But the people that were drumming, one person would take away the fact that they've been able to just get something out. They're sitting there drumming away, or their mind's just taken off what it was on before. Someone else, there'd be a change in rhythm, and they would say, well, when that change of rhythm came, my mind shifted. The rhythm before had put me in mind of this, and then I was in mind of that. And that was the shift they felt. But I wasn't in control of any of those things, of course. Only the room, only somehow the conditions, to the extent that I was even that, not completely, but to the extent I was. And then you're adding in this extra layer that people can also ask for what they might need, or what might be the thing which is engaging to them, the thing that might allow them to interact in a different way. I do think it's quite a paradigm shifter that you're talking about.
I do. I think because, I think that the current approach or the paradigm that we are currently transitioning out of is a patriarchal colonialist approach. It's very much top down. It's about we know best. Generally, it's about European or North American male voices who know best. And this is about how shifting that, recognizing that everybody knows best about their own context and themselves. But there may be some things that get in the way of that. So when we can't talk about this without really talking about the context of trauma. And Human Hive and MWB, we both work within environments of conflict and post-conflict. But more and more, I recognize that we're all traumatized. There's trauma in every society. It doesn't matter where you live or where you come from. Even in the most settled, supposedly peaceful countries right now, there's a huge amount of personal and societal community trauma that was hidden a little bit before the COVID pandemic and has really come to the surface. And a lot of those traumas are to do with familial issues, generational issues, poverty issues. And so whenever we're in a new space, wherever we are in a space where we are bringing humans together, we have to understand that there will be trauma present as well. And if there's trauma present, we have to address the space from a neurobiological perspective and not from the old top-down, very cognitive and very left brain perspective. We have to address the safety within the nervous system, the felt sense safety, because trauma is not a cognitive thing. Dysregulation is not cognitive. It exists within the body and within the nervous system. So if we're not able to create environments that feel safe, that feel inclusive, doesn't matter how much you say or what you do, it's not going to be enough. It's got to feel right. And that does come from the people who are opening up the space and holding the space. So it's a very, very important role. I think it's not, the shift is that your role is not necessarily to have all the knowledge and have all the answers, because the answer is in the room. The people who are there with you are going to have the knowledge and have the answers. But your role is to be as regulated as possible, as safe as possible, and to hold that environment as well as possible so that all that magic can take place between people. When people feel unsafe, the prefrontal cortex closes down, which is executive function and the ability to respond to the present moment, to make choices and use the knowledge you already have and learn from the environment around you. If that's closed down, we're only going to be operating from the brainstem, from a behavioral perspective, from a defense behavioral perspective. And it's these defense behaviors that have started the conflicts in the first place. People have come, we all live in these environments where people are very reactive because their nervous systems take over. So this is a paradigm shift, because we want to train and support a global army of facilitators who have regulated nervous systems and know how to create those spaces of safety, so other people can then catch that, can learn how to do that too. And all of themselves can be available in the space. And that is the big paradigm shift. I'm here to create space for you to do stuff. I'm not here to tell you what to do in that space.
And you use this beautiful word in your mission, Darren, regenerate. Just to read your mission statement: the Human Hive trains, supports, and resources change makers working to regenerate people, places, and planet. And regenerate suggests almost a step beyond, right? It's regenerate. It's going back to the best version of something. It's to make it even more nourished. It's to what does it mean to you?
Well, there are various elements to it. To regenerate something is to allow it to flourish on its own terms. Is to provide the space and the environment for flourishing and evolution to take place. The reason we came to this term, kind of regeneration, is because we were talking a lot about sustainability and thinking about sustainability. Like a lot of the work that we do is focused on supporting people to problem solve around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So those 17 goals that have been set up by the global community that need to be addressed by 2030. And they range from poverty and quality education all the way through to climate change, life on land, life in the ocean. There's a whole variety of different things within those goals. But we started to think about it, that actually sustainability is not enough. The where we've got to as a planetary community is not sustainable. And actually, do we want to sustain a lot of the practices that are already taking place? Because most of the practices that we be sustaining are the ones that have got us into this mess in the first place. And actually, there's been so much degradation. So much of our natural environment has been degraded. Our climate is degraded. We talk about people, places, and planet. The mental health of human beings, the ability for local economies and local environments to navigate their own future, and then the planet itself. We need to regenerate, because we have to fix the damage that's been done before. So we got to this place of saying, well, okay, as an organization, we don't only want to be sustainable. We want to be, everywhere we go, we want to provide the environment for regeneration to take place. Within people, that's around knowledge, skills, and relationships. In local communities, local environments, places, that's around local economy. It's around local identity. And on planet, it's around climate change, how we take care of our waste, closed loop, circular economies, replanting, all of those things. So maybe more on the more environmental level. And that's what we are trying to promote through our training programs and through our projects, is that we have to work hard now as a global community to allow the world to change and to heal itself.
So whichever level you're working, wherever your direct engagement is, these other things have to be considered because they are being affected.
Absolutely. So for example, we run a school in the Dominican Republic, and that's a school for change. It's an unschool for change makers. And Kate, my business partner, is the principal. It's her project, and we had to think about a lot of our students fly in from all over the world. So how do we justify the carbon footprint of people flying in to attend our school? That's not very regenerative. So what we're looking at is, okay, well, if you're flying in, where are there local projects where you can support the regeneration of the environment? Can you offset your carbon enough? But while you're in the community, what can you be doing in the community that is going to make your visit to this island, to this local place, a positive and regenerative experience? It's not about coming in and transplanting your version of wherever it is you've come from to have your own little expat colonial experience. It's about, no, you're here in this place with this community, with these people, and if you're coming here, you're doing something to regenerate that. I mean, we're at the early stage of our development, and we are absolutely not getting it all right at the moment. We're working and evolving it. But every time I talk to Kate, and the figures that we can now give about the number of local people we're employing, the number of local kids who've been able to attend learning experiences in our school, the local businesses that we are working with, the number of trees that have been planted in the environment, all of those things can count towards our regeneration of Cabrera, this community in the north of Dominican Republic. And we've got a way to go still with that.
Does that feel like a step beyond the Sustainable Development Goals also? I mean, one of the criticisms which you suggested and maybe touched on, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but that those Sustainable Development Goals also, they come from a certain paradigm of thought. Mm-hmm. And you suggested that some of the people, the kind of voices which are the hegemonic, which are the most powerful voices, are also causing a lot of the problems. So there's a style of thought which is at both ends of the equation. And the Sustainable Development Goals, one criticism is that they're built from a paradigm which in itself is so problematic. The goals mm-hmm. themselves can't help but be a bit flawed. So is that conscious? I know that your podcast also uses these goals as a focus point for discussion. as a kind of springboard, because the issues are clearly very important ones that the goals raise. But is that conscious to kind of try and step beyond them, step beyond even the goals to try and shift paradigm there?
It very much is now. It wasn't when we started. When we, our podcast, we have 5 episodes of the podcast. We're working on the 6th. We're very young. It's a young podcast. But for me, because I've been pulling them together and pulling the interviews together, and I've been looking deeper and deeper into the Sustainable Development Goals, and each one of these episodes, I have recognized that, as you say, the lens in which those goals have been viewed is from a particular paradigm and a particular mindset. And I felt actually in the discussion, they don't go far enough. They're not human enough, and they're not regenerative enough. They come out of a neoliberal capitalist agenda. I'm very, very glad that the Sustainable Development Goals are there, and that the United Nations have placed them there, and that there is an imperative around them. I think that's great, which is why we want to work with them. But I have noticed that they still come out of trying to change things from the same paradigm. So, for example, I was saying this to you earlier, SDG 3, quality education. So there's a goal that everybody should have access to quality education, but nowhere in that goal is it defined what quality means. What is defined within that goal is access. So more people should have access to education, that more girls should have access to education, and education that goes all the way up beyond just primary or infant education. So those are the stated elements of the goal, but nowhere does it say what that education should look like or how people should engage with that education. As an educator and as someone who is very interested in shifting the paradigm around education, I believe that the formal westernized approach to education, which has been adopted over most of the planet, is unfit for purpose. Because again, it's done to people and decided for people. There's not much co-creation and collaboration between those who are the ones who hold the knowledge, let's say, the teachers and educators, and those who are supposed to be the sponges taking in that knowledge. Our school is set up as a place for self-directed learning, where young people are working on projects for themselves and learning how to manage themselves, how to manage their relationships, how to manage their ability to affect change on the planet. So they dictate the direction of travel. So for me, therefore, the goal of quality education, as the United Nations has applied it or has defined it, doesn't go anywhere near far enough, because it just basically keeps us all within the paradigm of industrialized education that we're all in and failing at.
Yeah. And we're talking about very specific examples, of course, but it's linked, isn't it, to the spaces that you originally started from when you meet people with safety and with inclusion.
Yes.
Darren, I would love to go to your school and learn. Can you tell us how people can engage with Human Hive?
Absolutely. So we have a website, humanhive.org, which has got links to various of our projects and training programs. The school itself has its own website, which is thehive.school. And we'd love you to anybody to engage with that. We have an online community which you can access through our website, which is on the Mighty Networks platform. And there it's a great community that's developed, and there's good conversation, and we're often doing kind of more events and Q&As and different things happening in there. But you can engage through our podcast, and in all sorts of different ways. And I have to say, part of the reason we were having this conversation to begin with was our connection through Art27. So if you are an Art27 member, if you're considering becoming an Art27 member, it's also another great way to network, not only with us, but with other fantastic organizations across Europe and further afield now, I think, who are working particularly with arts and culture in a way that is inclusive and safe. One of our principles within the Human Hive is that we think of everything like a patchwork. So patchwork. So we talked about our education model to begin with as patchwork education. Every intervention was complete in itself, because you never knew who was going to be able to come back or what they needed next. So you could then bolt on the next bit and then the next bit and follow in the direction you wanted to. And we also thought about that in terms of the people that we were working with and the organizations that we were networking with, is that everybody has a piece of the patchwork. That's the fantastic thing about this network, this fantastic Art27 network, is that each organization and each member has its own unique contribution to the patchwork. And when we bring all of our skills together, then we're much, much more powerful, and we can do much more. We don't all have to be like each other. We don't have to be the same as each other. But if we can collaborate and work together, then the different skill sets can be used and applied in the places where they're needed the most.
Are there any specific courses coming up, Darren, that people might be able to join?
Well, we actually have an online course, kind of a beginner online course. It's called How to Make a Difference. It's really focused on people who are maybe at the beginning of their journey of activism and want to start to make a difference, want to work with people around the world to solve global problems. And it follows our 6-part framework. So we'll talk you through how to get started, how to ensure that you are responding in the right way, how to make sure that you are safe yourself and a safe person yourself, how to co-create and collaborate with other people, how to reflect on the work that you're doing, and then how to make decisions about what you might do next based on what you've already learned. So if you're interested in that, you can find links to that on our website, humanhive.org. And love to see you in there.
And we're also very excited to announce that our listeners will have more opportunity to hear from you over the coming weeks, because we can announce that Darren is going to be hosting some of these resounding podcasts in the upcoming months. So we're very much looking forward to your voice and your insights across the coming months.
Thank you very much, Chris. As I said to you, I'm going to miss your voice. I really enjoy listening to you as an interviewer.
Brilliant. And we want to thank you very much for joining us today, Darren. It's been fascinating to talk to you as always. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Resounding is brought to you by the Art27 Network, a network of like-minded initiatives using art and culture to respond to the ongoing crisis of displacement of human beings in Europe and around the world. To find out more and to join our growing network, you can visit our website, art27.art, or follow us on Facebook at Art27. This podcast was produced and edited by Ed Holland. The theme tune was written by Matteo Gallesi in collaboration with Synca. Thank you for listening.